So I've gotten this question a lot since Monday, basically asking which running back should I be looking to buy since I'm competing and just lost Breece Hall. And this is a tough spot to be in. And I'm sure a lot of you out there who are 5-2, 6-1, maybe even 7-0 who had Breece Hall are probably wondering the exact same thing. How are you going to replace that production on a championship level team? Unfortunately, you probably can't, as Breece Hall was the RB7 and actually averaging over 19 points per game over the last 4 weeks. And there's only a few players that match or beat that production, most of which are probably out of your price range or on other teams that are also contending, and they're not going to sell them to you. So instead, what I would like to do is acquire cheaper running backs who can give you most of that production back. And ideally, I would like to do that without having to trade away Breece Hall himself or without trading away your 2023 first round pick. So I have 3 players that I believe fit those criteria that you could go trade for right now and keep going toward a championship. Spoiler alert, I did not include guys like Leonard Fournette, Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones even, because they're all worth a first, and you'd most likely have to pay that as a contender to buy those guys. Now, obviously, if you can get them for less than that, I mean, go ahead, do it. But the players that I picked today are all consensus values of less than 1 first-round pick. So the first player I have on this list is Falcons running back Cordarrelle Patterson, who has been on the IR for the past 3 weeks and will miss this week because of the 4-week rule. So then next week, he's eligible to return and is hopefully back and ready for week 9. And if there's anything that we know about the Falcons this year, it's their stubborn dedication to their running game, despite being down multiple scores, despite their 2 uber talented first-round receivers. None of that matters to Arthur Smith because they will run the ball 40 times a game, and we just have to endure that. So because of that dedication to the run game, Patterson should see a very healthy workload when he returns in both the running and the receiving game. None of the Falcons rushers currently have done enough to make them have to be a significant part of the offense when he returns. So I expect Patterson to be what he was for most of last year and the start of this season, which for the first 3 weeks of the year, Patterson averaged over 16 fantasy points per game, which included 2 games with over 120 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns scored in those 3 weeks. He was also on his way to another RB1 week in week 4 with 40 yards and a touchdown on 9 carries in the first half, but then basically sat out the remainder of the game with the injury that ultimately landed him on the injured reserve. But 16 points per game is exactly what you need if you don't have Breece Hall, and his schedule rest of season is very favorable with matchups against the Panthers, the Bears, Washington, Pittsburgh, plus the LA Chargers, who are currently 3rd in fantasy points allowed to running backs. And then they have 3 average-ish run defenses that I'm not super terrified of in Baltimore, Arizona, and New Orleans. Patterson is a fantastic buy right now, as you can probably pry him away from his current manager on the cheap. And I would say pay your late second as a contender, but you might not even have to do that and might be able to get it for less than that, especially if the team really needs someone to play this week and they can't wait for Patterson to come back from the IR. The second player on my list is Eagles running back Miles Sanders, who I'm going to admit has been a surprise for me this season with how well he's been playing. Sanders is currently the RB15 overall, and that's with a bye week included, averaging 14.5 points per game, tallying 3 RB2 weeks and 1 top 3 week so far in 6 games played. And the fact of the matter here is the Eagles are really, really good, and being the RB1 on a really, really good team is a really, really good thing. Like the Falcons, the Eagles' schedule rest of season is very enticing with matchups against Pittsburgh, Houston, Chicago, and Washington, plus very winnable matchups against the Packers, Colts, Titans, Saints, and Giants twice. I honestly wouldn't be shocked if they finished the season undefeated, and that's only going to benefit Sanders and their running game. I think the reason Sanders has been so surprising for me so far this season is the fact that he has been getting very consistent and very heavy volume, with 13 plus carries every single game this season, including 15 plus carries in every game since week 2. I mean, he's also seeing 2 to 3 targets a game, which, yeah, isn't great, but it's something, and an extra 4 fantasy points a game from receiving isn't going to hurt you. He's always been a very efficient back. The problem up to this point has just been volume consistency and nagging injuries, both of which seem to not really be an issue so far this season. And because of that, it makes Miles Sanders a great buy right now to bolster your running back depth. Recent trades on him show that he's still valued as a 2nd round rookie pick. And if you're competing and throwing what hopefully does become the 212 or 210 and 10 team leagues for Miles Sanders, go ahead and add in like a fun throw and to really sweeten that deal. Guys like Daniel Bellinger, Isaiah Pacheco, somebody on that level who's still very fun and enticing just throw him in with your second round pick and go get Miles Sanders. Or if you have extra receiving depth, maybe try to send a Michael Gallup or like a Sky Moore, maybe even Jerry Jeudy, someone young who isn't really producing right now, but is still enticing to a contender over the long term from a dynasty perspective. And the third player on this list is actually an amalgam of players that should all be super cheap, but could potentially be super productive at different times throughout this season. So in no particular order, I think all of these guys should be in consideration as buys for spot start production for the remainder of the year. And that includes Antonio Gibson, Gus Edwards, Jamal Williams, Khalil Herbert, Eno Benjamin, Rachaad White, Deontay Foreman, and Elijah Mitchell. And if you want to get a little deeper and go for potentially like throw-in players in deals, perhaps even waiver wire targets at this point, I really like guys like Zamir White, Kyron Williams, Dearness Johnson, Samaje Perine, and I'm not going to stop talking about Matt Breida as the most underrated handcuff in the league right now. But going back to the first list, all of those guys I believe can be bought for less than a second round pick right now, and they all have some standalone value as desperation flexes should you need them, even with their starters healthy. But most importantly, they have all shown massive upside as the guy for their teams should that injury happen to their starter. I mean, Gus Edwards is in the middle of that right now with J.K. Dobbins having another knee surgery. Deontay Foreman is the lead guy with CMC gone and Chuba Hubbard dealing with a minor ankle sprain. Jamal Williams has been great already with DeAndre Swift out for a month, and what if he continues to be out? We've already gotten quality starts from both Khalil Herbert and Eno Benjamin, and more could still be coming. Rachaad White could be the next player to join the quality starts list if Leonard Fournette were to miss a game or two. And don't forget about my boy Elijah Mitchell, who is expected to return after the Niners bye week in week 9, so 2 weeks from now. And yes, Christian McCaffrey is there now, and Mitchell is probably irrelevant while CMC is healthy. But what if CMC isn't healthy at some point this season and they have to turn to Elijah Mitchell for maybe a game or two? The point is that we still have 7 weeks before the fantasy playoffs start, and a lot can happen in that time, especially at the running back position. So stock up on some of these cheap backup options because you never know when they might be necessary. And speaking of running backs, if you haven't checked out my video on the James Robinson trade to the New York Jets and what that does for guys like Travis Etienne and Michael Carter, you can check out that video right up here.